The time has come now to seize those assets and to give them to Ukraine for her defence, which of course is actually our defence.
Let's talk then about that letter in today's Times where you see a group of politicians, including British politicians, calling for the G7 to transfer all of those frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. It would add up to about $300 billion. One of the signatories is Mike Martin, Liberal Democrat MP. Mentioned him just a moment ago. He's a member of the Defence Committee at Westminster, and he's on the line. Hello to you, Mike.
Hi there, how are you?
Well, Mike, and thank you for coming on. Tell me then about your message to G7 leaders.
It's very, very simple. We've had, since the beginning of the war, $300 billion of Russian assets that have been frozen. And we've taken the interest from those assets and used that to fund Ukraine. And I think now the time has come, particularly with the election of Donald Trump, who's not so keen on Ukraine, is much more keen on Putin, not very keen on the defence of Europe. The time has come now to seize those assets and to give them to Ukraine for her defence, which of course is actually our defence. Ukraine is fighting for us at the moment.
Right, so you're saying, look, if it's okay to grab away, to cream off the interest and the profits from those Russian reserves and just take the reserves, no problem with all of that. Sometimes you see it discussed as something which might run into legal obstacles, but is that true? And where would this move be challenged?
Well, there's a pretty clear international law doctrine, actually. It's called state countermeasures. And what it states is that countries can take measures against other states, countermeasures against them, if there have been grave breaches of international law, like, for example, genocide or war crimes. And as you'll know, Vladimir Putin and other officials have indeed got arrest warrants out for them for war crimes, for deporting Ukrainian children to Russia, for other war crimes in Ukraine. So Russia has violated international law in the most grievous fashion. And we've actually also done this before. Iraqi assets were seized after the first Gulf War and used to compensate victims of Iraqi aggression. So we've got precedent. We know how it can be done legally. The US has passed the enabling legislation, and we're having a debate in Parliament today calling on the UK government to get going.
Well, just explain to us then, Mike, the reluctance of some of those key leaders to taking this step and seizing those Russian assets. Because, I mean, there are some who support it in the European Commission. The Foreign Affairs a chief there wants to see this done, but there are problems with it in the eyes of others. What have they got against doing it?
Well, I think there have sort of been two broad arguments levelled against it. One is that if you take frozen assets from a state, from their central bank reserves, that creates financial instability. Now, that may be true, although, obviously there's a difference of opinion. Now, but I can tell you this, that the financial instability that would be created by that potentially is a lot less than the financial instability that's created by Ukraine losing this war. And the other argument is this: it's sort of quite difficult legally to do. But as I've already laid out, and don't take my word for it, there are hundreds of eminent legal scholars who speak to this doctrine of state countermeasures and also the precedent that we already have. I think the most telling point on the legal argument is that the US in April 2024 passed the Repo Act, which was the enabling act, which enables the US government to seize Russian assets and give them to Ukraine. So if it's good enough for America, how is it not good enough for us?
In what court, though, Mike, would Russia, if it was minded to do it, in what court could Russia go to appeal or seek to have this thing reversed?
Well, I assume that one would do it through the International Criminal Court. I mean, that is the sole legal court that sits above state level.
Yeah. Well, okay. And as you say, you've got your argument ready for that, and others who'd share
well,
your
view. Well, they're not going to go there, are they?
Case.
Because then they have to answer for their own crimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Putin is wanted by the International Criminal Court. There's also an argument, isn't there, that other states might be deterred from investing their assets in Europe and Western banks if this step were taken. Do you take that threat seriously? Does it concern you?
Well, I think it's a very important point, and that's why today in Parliament we're not arguing that the UK should act alone. There are about 25 billion pounds of Russian assets frozen in the UK, but no state should act alone, because then perhaps another country, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, for example, might say, well, we're not going to put those assets in the UK because they tend to take sovereign assets. But if all of the G7 countries moved at the same time, and that's what we're asking the government to investigate, that represents all the safe floated stable currencies in the world. So if we all move together, it establishes a new legal precedent, and B, those assets, Saudi Arabia or other countries, Thailand, whichever, they're not going to have anywhere else to put their assets, so they will continue to invest in the G7.
How do you read the British government's position on this?
I think the British government has been very busy since it got elected, and we can see all sorts of things that it's doing with the NHS and with planning and with devolution. And I think potentially this has gone in the too difficult bucket. But what we're asking them to do now is not to take this step and to seize the assets, but to investigate how they're going to do it and to come back to the House of Commons and explain how it can be legally done. We want it to be legally done, properly done with allies.
Okay. While you are with us, Mike, I see that your party leader, Ed Davey, has called for the American ambassador to this country to be called into the Foreign Office to be carpeted over the behaviour and the outpourings on Twitter of Elon Musk. Do you agree with that? I assume you do agree with that. And tell me what use that would be.
Well, so, I mean, Elon Musk is in 14 days' time is going to be an extremely senior US government official. If you like, he's the sort of a cabinet level appointee of the new administration. And what you're referring to is this tweet that he's put out today, which is a poll asking whether the America should overthrow the government in the UK. This is completely unacceptable for any country to do that, let alone a senior official to be of one of our closest allies. So
right.
Absolutely right and proper.
So what should be the message then? Because I don't think it's going to happen. But what should be the message to the American ambassador if he's called into the Foreign Office to transmit back to Washington?
The message is that you can't agitate and spread lies, and which is essentially what's happening over grooming gangs. Of course, sexual exploitation is an extraordinarily appalling crime, but effectively what's been doing here by people like Trump and other, but by Elon Musk and other politicians in the UK, is they're effectively jumping on this bandwagon, and that's completely unacceptable to do that. And as for extending it to overthrowing the British government, I mean, we're in la la land here.
Yeah, maybe so. But what do you then do when Donald Trump just ignores that and carries on as he is and lets Elon Musk carry on as he is?
Well, we'll have to see what happens, won't we, with the inauguration and what happens after that. But sometimes you have to lay down markers in the sand for what is acceptable and what is not acceptable.
All right, Mike Martin, Lib Dem MP, good to talk to you.